let me see a showing of hands of how many of you have heard of Better Place or Project Better Place. Pretty good. All right. Excellent. We were just talking about that over breakfast. I was going to ask that question just to find out. Shai Agassi, apparently he's a rock star in Israel. Our next guest is Mike Ranoff. Mike is a longtime reader of EV World, and if I remember correctly, when I interviewed you, Mike, you mentioned that you became aware of Shai's efforts from something you'd read on EV World, I believe. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, but when I interviewed Shai, he brought up, he says, you know, Bill, he says, when I sat down to begin to research this thing, I'm putting in a plug, by the way, when I sat down to research this thing every night after I left, you know, SAP, or even before he left the SAP, he said, the place I started my research every night was always at EV World. Thank you, sir. Be sure you write down evworld.com. I can use all the traffic I can get. Thank you. Okay, so Mike is going to talk about, Mike was actually the person that was instrumental in facilitating the meeting of Eden Offer with Israel Corporation, and he was also the gentleman who raised the first $100 million to get Shai's project up and going. So Mike, first of all, congratulations, and tell us more of the story.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to finally meet Bill. We've been corresponding for years now, and it's the first time we've met, so it's really great to be here and to walk past that Benjamin Franklin on the bench and think that that really is the godfather of our industry. So it's very appropriate to be in this venue. Every disruption, you know, has not just new technology, but a new business model, and that's the idea behind Better Place. We're not a technology company. We're not. We don't invent things, but we have a fairly unique business model that we think is the right way to bring on this revolution that you've already begun to hear a little bit about this morning. The car makers, as Charles alluded to, have said that the electrification of the car is inevitable, that that's the path that we're on, and that's what we're going to see. It's been, to this date, fairly incremental, but I think you're going to see that change in the next few years in a very big way because of all of the drivers, not just on the business side, but on the economic, the geopolitical, the environmental. All of these elements are coming to a head, and I think we really need to move into a revolutionary phase of this industry. So what has kept, as was referenced, 100 years ago there were electric cars around. What has kept electric cars from becoming a mainstream product? What has kept them from competing with internal combustion cars? Well, you know, again, as Charles said, there are two major elements. There's the battery's limitations in terms of its range and its cost. And what Better Place really set out to do, because the mission that Shai started this company on was to end oil. And he looked at all the different ways of doing it and found that electricity really is really the best platform. In fact, electricity has always succeeded when it's been given a level playing field. If you think of kerosene lighting and how quickly that became obsolete after the invention of the light bulb, to the point where it actually made oil obsolete. So electricity has made oil obsolete before and will do it again. But the limitations have been the range of the battery and the cost of the battery. So the first thing that Better Place does is it addresses this range problem by putting an infrastructure in. We don't even think about the infrastructure that exists today for internal combustion cars because it's just so much a part of the landscape. You don't think about getting stuck in your car because you know wherever you're driving to, there'll be a place to fill up with gasoline. And we have to create a parallel infrastructure for electric cars. So what does that infrastructure look like? Well, you have if you have a battery with about 100-mile range, which is a reasonable range and which is not science fiction, which Charles's batteries will give you. If you have that range and you have the ability to plug wherever you park your car, then you have that range every time you get into your car. So if you're plugging at home, at work, in the garage over here, downtown retail, every time you get back to your car, you start with a 100-mile range. So you just solve for 95% of trips. But really it was when Shai thought about how you solve to the other 5% that he came up with the magic that makes the electric car work. And when he's thinking about how do you solve for the time the guy wants to drive more than 100 miles at a time, and you don't want to stop and charge because that'll take too long. You don't want to wait for hours while your car charges in the middle of the trip. And there is such a thing as fast charge, but one of the other elements of our criteria is that it has to scale, and fast charge is not something that scales, because if everybody does it at the same time, it'll collapse the grid. So the alternative was to exchange the battery. And he looked into this and found that there actually is precedent for it, and it's technologically not an enormous hurdle to get over. We'll be demonstrating it in the coming year. But the most important part of this was that made him recognize that really what makes the electric car work as an industry is the separation of the car from the battery. Because as was referenced, this battery is expensive. It's a big asset. It has its own depreciation and life cycle, and has to be managed. And so what Better Place does is it owns all of the batteries. It owns all the batteries in the environment. It's part of the infrastructure, not part of the car. It goes along with the battery exchange stations and with the charge spots in the environment. So what's the best way to think about Better Place? What we really are is a mobile operator. We're just like the mobile operator that you have for your cell phone. What does AT&T do? They buy bandwidth from the government, and they sell minutes to you as the consumer. And in between, they put infrastructure. For them, it's towers. For us, it's what I described. And they put devices. For them, it looks like this. For us, it's the cars that have that look just like the cars that you see today, except obviously have a totally different method of locomotion. So that is the way that Better Place, and then you will subscribe to Better Place for your energy. You will pay for the miles that you drive, and that's how we now. When you compare this to, for example, the Volt that Charles just talked about, the little engine that is in the back of that Volt that it carries around with it is essentially a range extender. But what are the limitations of that? First of all, it's an internal combustion range extender. It takes oil, it has a tailpipe, it has emissions. Second of all, it adds a lot of cost when you're putting the range extension actually in the vehicle. We actually think the range extension is not in the vehicle, it's outside of the vehicle. It's part of it. It'd be like you're carrying your own gas station around, right? You don't do that, you stop the gas station and you get gas. So the infrastructure should be in the environment, not in the vehicle. And that is what we think will enable this revolution in electric vehicles that we will see in the coming decade. So I guess I'll stop there because we're going to have a lot of time for questions.
All right, great, excellent, thank you.